So every once in a while, I get the question, what exactly does the religion editor at CNN do? Do you like pray with Wolf Blitzer or something? For the record, I would totally pray with Wolf Blitzer. He's a really nice guy, but that is not what I do. What I do instead is I ask people impolite questions about the kinds of things you're not supposed to talk about at dinner parties, like, why do you believe in God? What do you pray about? And where do you look for meaning in this world? In 14 years of covering religion, I don't think I've ever heard any two people give exactly the same answers to those questions. Everybody's got a slightly different take. And that's especially true right now. You see, some people believe that we're living in the early stages of a religious revolution. I'll explain. Lord Jonathan Sacks, a British rabbi, has a theory that every leap in communications technology has corresponded with equally large leaps in religion and culture. The first writing and symbols in ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and elsewhere was pretty much the birth of civilization itself. The development of the alphabet in the Sinai desert corresponded with the rise of monotheism, the idea that there's one God in control of everything instead of gods for the wind and rain and love and lust and everything else. The move from scrolls to books bound together in pages like the Bible gave early Christians an edge as they sought to spread their faith across the vast Roman Empire. And the advent of the printing press gave Martin Luther the power to share his ideas across Europe with unprecedented speed and volume, culminating in the Protestant Reformation. And then there's us. We're so busy in our lives, sometimes it seems like we don't even realize we're living through a communications revolution that's every bit as big as those. And the thing that's exciting and a little bit scary sometimes is that we don't know yet what that will mean for our spiritual lives. But we do have a few hints. According to nearly every survey taken in the last decade, most religions in this country are losing members, and some are losing members pretty dramatically. The religions that are not losing members are not necessarily gaining a lot of new converts. They're mainly better at retaining the members they already have, and they're having lots of babies. But those babies may not grow up to be religious believers. If you look at a graph of religious observance among American generations, it looks sort of like a ski slope. You have the silent generation, the oldest folks at the top, who are the most religious, and millennials, the youngest and least religious, down at the bottom. 1 out of every 3 millennials say they're not affiliated with any organized religion. Researchers call them nuns. That's not nuns like Catholic nuns with a habit and rosary beads. That's nuns like none of the above. But what's interesting about millennials is that they're not totally done with religion. Just 4% say they're atheists. 85% say that they search for spiritual and religious content online multiple times a day. And what that means is that you have this rising generation of Americans who don't seem to be all that interested in the old forms of religion, but are still hungry for spiritual knowledge and experience. And that, many people say, is a pretty good recipe for a spiritual revolution. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to see new religions crop up like tomorrow. Instead, we may see new or reform movements within already established religions like Buddhism or Christianity or Islam. But there are a few people these days who actually are trying to start new religions, particularly in Silicon Valley. The robotics engineer behind Uber's driverless trucks, for example, has started a religion to worship an artificial intelligence that he's building. This AI, he says, will see and know everything there is to know about the universe. And so while it may not be able to answer our prayers, he says it will at least be able to answer our questions. Researchers at Johns Hopkins and other places are experimenting with psychedelic drugs to see if they can create or recreate mystical and spiritual experiences in the lab. And a group of pastors, again out in Silicon Valley, has started a church in virtual reality, which they hope might attract the kind of people who would never step foot inside a real church, either because they've had bad experiences at churches before, or they've never been to church and they have no idea what to do there. There's so much hype about religion and technology right now that some people are calling it the Nerd Rapture. What's interesting, though, is that for many people, change can be a really scary thing, particularly religious change. The Protestant Reformation, for example, led to decades of bloody battles in Europe. In our time, we've seen a spike in hate crimes against Muslims, against Sikhs, against almost every religious minority in this country. And this is happening just as they become a bigger and bigger part of the American population. Now, experts who study hate crimes say they're not actually driven by hate. They're driven by fear and ignorance. It's a lot easier to attack another religion or a religious person if you don't know that much about them. But the opposite is true as well. Studies show that if you have a Muslim friend, for example, you're much more likely to have a positive view of Muslims and of Islam itself. So what that means is that the real antidote to hate and fear may not be higher walls or stronger police forces, it's knowledge. And that brings us back to Rabbi Sacks and his point about spiritual revolutions. The reason that ours hasn't really gotten off the ground yet, he says, is that the people who are most adept at exploiting these new technologies are doing it for all of the worst reasons. They're using hate and fear and misinformation to try to divide us, to pit one religion against another. And what we haven't learned to do, at least not yet, is use social media and the internet to bring people together, to teach us to overcome our fears of those who look and pray differently than we do. But like I said, we may be just at the beginning of our spiritual revolution, which means that the future is pretty much wide open. And the next Martin Luther or the next Buddha could be right on the horizon. If religious history has taught us anything, it's that stranger things have happened. Thank you.